Hey everyone, welcome back. So in the last video, we have created one end-to-end test where what we did, we performed some operation in this application resttest.com where we have entered some data and we made a get call. Okay, what we did, we made a get, we clicked here, we got some data here, we retrieved it, and then we made actual API call with this endpoint URL, and we validated our UI data with against API, and that was a get call. Now in this video, what we will try to do is we'll make a post call where, for example, we'll take an example of this one website which provides this fake API. If you see here, reqres.in, which provides a fake API, you can just use it for try. So we are going to take an example from here where we'll make a post request and then see that how we are able to do the same thing from our WebdriverIO. So see, we have this post create option, post operation, where we have a create. So if you click here, you'll get the details here. It will show in the right side what is the URL, that is endpoint, and what data you need to pass as a body in a post call, and then what status code you'll get as a response, and what is the body that you'll get. Okay, so this is your URL, this is your endpoint. So I'll just copy this and go back to website here. I'll make this change to post, paste this URL, and after that paste this endpoint. Okay, if you click directly it will navigate. I'll navigate back here, so and paste this URL, right? So I think I have copied fully, so yeah, you just paste this URL, and then again, as we have seen here in post create, you need to pass this as a body. So this is a key, this is a value, so let's pass this as well. Now here in this application, to do the same thing, you just need to click on add parameter and then pass the key, and I'll say value as anything. I'll give my name, I'll add one more parameter, another parameter is job. So I'll just pass that parameter name as job and I'll say tester. Now this is a post call endpoint. This is the complete URL. We'll add two parameter and click on this button. So we are doing just entering some data in text boxes, some values we are entering. We are clicking on this Ajax button and it will give you some response, some data. So this is the response and this is the body that we are getting. Now first we will do this in the UI, and then we'll make actual post call API where we'll see that how to pass the body or the payload, this data as a payload, and then validate against whatever we are getting in the API. So that's what we're going to see. Now before that, in the last video we have written some code. Let's try to optimize this. So if you see here, I have created two variable, API response, API status code, and that in actual making API call where we are making API get call with this request.get endpoint, we are storing that. So we are reading this response body and storing in this response and status code in this status code. Later, as this we have created outside of this when function, outside here we are able to use in later part also. So we are using that here to assert with our actual UI response. Now instead, what I'll do, I am going to delete this and let me comment out for now, and I'll create this response as a class level variable or outside of this when function instead of writing it here. So let's make this change, and what I'll do, I'll delete this as well. Okay, and I'll say let and response variable. Now this variable we are going to use here, and with this we will be able to from there we'll access status code and all. But before that we need to define type of this. Now we will define the type. So we can define any if you don't know, but what we are doing, this response is nothing but actual API get call response. If you hover your mouse here, it will tell you what it is returning. SuperTest.test it is returning. So let's keep the type as same thing, SuperTest dot, it should auto suggest you, taking a bit of time, yeah, test. So this will be the return type. Now let's see what it is saying. Sorry, it will not be a SuperTest, but it should be a response. Okay, it should be a response type here. It is returning a response. Okay, so this is returning a response that we need to define here. Now we don't need this anymore, and we have created only one variable instead of creating multiple here. Now what we will do, with this help of this variable, we'll access our API call code. So what we'll say now, here we are already getting UI with the help of this function which created, and we need to validate against API response. So our API response contains in this variable. Okay, with that it is a response dot. Now you'll get auto suggestion for whatever we have available reason, because we have defined the type. See, suppose if you remove this type, and now if you say here dot, you don't get any auto suggestion here, not whatever is required. This is a different, just inside Mocha framework, right? Not auto suggestion. Now let's me do a control Z. Now once we define type, we'll get suggestions right here. So we need here status code, right? And then here a response. So we need to say response dot body. That will give you complete response. Now here you need to say response dot body, and inside body we are getting data email. So with this now we are able to remove this completely. Okay, now we don't have multiple variables here. It was 2, now we have made it 1, and we have defined the type also. So that was the change that I was hoping, I missed it in the last part. So just make sure you do this change and just try to run that. It is not breaking your code, and it should work fine actually. So this is the change from the last video. Now in that today's post call, I have already created a scenario here in the feature file. I have just uncommented. So in this scenario, as explained, we are going to test this API with this calls post API. So now, so if you see here, I have already defined the endpoint. It is very similar here. Whatever we had URL, we have URL, we have endpoint for getting a user. Here endpoint is to create a user, and I have created this step. So what I'm saying, when I perform create search for API, now this will do nothing but it will whatever I have done here manually, like selecting the post, entering the data, click on add parameter and adding these things, that it will do. And after that it will validate, it will make a post API call for this endpoint, and then it will validate whatever we are getting result in the UI and what we get in the actual API call, right? So for that, now let's just write the actual code for that. Now what I'll do, I have already created a page class for all these actions that is required. So I'll show you in the same page class itself. E2E, sorry, it will be in pages and then user page, and I have already created this page locators. This element locator doesn't look very good, but yeah, I've just to showing purpose, I've created this locator and this is working fine, and their related action method. Okay, now what this will do, this will select the method. Method is nothing but this method, post or put or create. By default, when the page load, it will be get, but we need a post. So I've created a method which will select the drop down as post. Now in the last video itself, previous video, we already have created this reusable functions in the command, in utils and command, and we have seen how to use this. So those all reusable methods are there. I have just used this to select a drop down. So that is there. Okay, page class. So it will select the drop down, then it will click. We already have a function to enter data here because we have done that in the last video itself, so we don't need to write again. Now then we have a function to click add parameter. That is nothing but this button, because in beginning, once you load this URL, you will have something like this. So you'll select the method, you will enter the endpoint, and then you will need to click on add parameter, enter the parameter name and value. So this will click on the add button, and then it will enter the first box, enter first name, parameter name, which is coming from the calling function. And then after that we need to click again add parameter and need to add the second value here, and for that we have enter second params, right? So these are the functions to perform this UI operation. We already have a function to click on Ajax button, and we already have a function to retrieve this data, so we don't have to write for whatever we have, right? Now in this, so let's look at the actual step definition. So now I have already created actual step definition. I will simply copy paste it. So now I have already created this all this step definition. It is nothing but a simple API. So I have created a method to select this drop down, right, in the page class, and I'm passing the string as I want post type. Here I want to select post, so I'm giving a post. Then there is a function to enter the API URL here. right? So we need to read the base URL not from the feature file. From feature file we are only passing this endpoint, and I have already explained in the previous video why we are passing only endpoint here, and from where we are passing the complete URL. So we are getting that as a service. I have mentioned you can mention as an endpoint or service or anything, and base URL we are reading from this configuration file. This all we have already discussed in the last video. Then function I'm calling to click on add parameter button, that will click add here. Then I'm calling a function to enter first parameter, that means name and value, and I'm passing that as a parameter as a name and value as a Sadab. Then I'll click again on the parameter button, which will add one more value here, and then I'll add another as parameters a job and tester, and then it will click on Ajax button, that means this making this call, right? So these are just to do this. Now once you are making this call, after that we already have function written to I validate. Here we have function to I validate the creator. Now this function we have written in the last video itself, that we have seen how to retrieve the text from this and this place. So if you're not sure, watch my previous video, that I have explained how to retrieve this and why we have parsed. Now the main thing we need to see here is how we can make a post API call. For this is the step definition I have created, and this is where we need to implement. So let's try to implement a post call. Okay, so first thing, in the last video we have already seen we have created, imported, installed SuperTest, and using SuperTest we have passed the URL, and using this request variable, this request we are calling the get or post method. So let's delete this now, and I'll say request, it should be a async, so it should be as we are using async, we need to say await. Now request dot, now this time we need to make a post call, so just type post, you'll get auto suggestion here, post. Inside that, now in the post you need to provide the endpoint we are reading from the feature file already, so I'm just passing this. Okay, and then now, so in actual API call we are able to define what kind of type it is this. So we are making API call post call, we have defined that, we have defined the URL as well. Now we need to pass some data from parameters or body, right? This is nothing but from here, if you see the example, this is the body we need to pass. That body now you can create here itself. So what I'll do, I'll create a body here, I'll say const payload, you can say anything here, equal to, and you need to create. So now I'll say name as Sadab, comma, job and tester. Now make sure whatever I am passing here, right, name and Sadab and job and tester, the same thing you pass here as well. Okay, similar, don't pass the different data. We are passing as of now in multiple places, but we will see how to optimize this code in the future video or the next video. But for now, just make sure you are creating like this. Now you need to say dot, and if you want to pass the body, you need to say send, so not right, and in send you can just pass this variable or object send, right? Now we'll tell that we are passing this as a if you want to define the parameter or headers, that we are passing content type as JSON format. So you can say now set, and with this set function or set method available, you can pass key value pair, and you can say what and all we have. Okay, so now our set will be nothing but content type we need to pass. So if I want to copy it, let me just, because I might do a mistake, sorry, we have it here itself, I'll just copy it from here. Content type and application JSON. We are just saying that we are passing this as body, this body or this payload object as a JSON format we are passing. So just mention that. Now this will give you our response. Now that you need to store in the variable response. We have already created a class level variable for response here, which will hold this value, right? Now this should give you the actual response. Okay, and then inside this, with this response which is available outside of this function, we should be able to use in this step where we are retrieving the text. That means we are retrieving this text, and then we need to validate against it. right? We have done the similar thing in the last video. Just new thing is we are making now post call instead of get call. So earlier, if you see here, scroll, we were just making get call with the endpoint. Now we are making post call, and we are passing the payload as well, and then some data. You can just pass it here like this, just to make it a little readable. Maybe you can pass like this, yeah, or you can pass in one line. So we are making the post call with the endpoint, then we are sending the data payload, and then we are passing as a content type as application JSON, right? And then we are, whatever we get, we are storing the response variable. Now here we are already getting the UI text. This will get nothing but this text. Okay, so now let me put an assertion. So we need to say expect this UI status should contain, so we'll say to contain, and what will contain a response. We will validate from the response API. So we have a response variable in the API, and with that we'll retrieve the status code. So now whatever we get in the UI should contain this, whatever we are getting in the API, a status code. Let's validate the body as well. Now let's not validate the complete body. Okay, we'll validate whether name, whatever we are passing, is getting correct or not, and the tester job, whatever we are passing, we are getting correctly or not. Only these two things. So we'll say first from UI response. Now we are, whatever we are getting as a string, but we are passing as a JSON. So it will act like a JSON response only. So you can say response dot and then dot name, which will validate the name. So from UI, whatever you get with that dot name, it will get the name. And here we can say to equal, and we can validate with API response. Now API response is stored in this response variable, so we need to say response dot body. Inside body, now we will have the variable. So inside whatever we are getting, right, we need to say response dot and then body name. Similarly, let's validate now after name job as well. So I'll say here response dot name from the UI, and from the API response variable dot body inside that job. Now let's see if this is working fine or not, because we have just already entered all the data. And what we will do, just to make sure, I'll do console.log also for API call whatever we are making, and I'll say not here, just to make sure whatever we are getting in this variable is right or not. So just let's validate that. Console.log response. With this response, let's see what we are getting in the body is correct or not. Just to show you that we are getting the correct body, I'm just doing a console log, not required to do, and I'll say API response body. So now let's run this and see if it is working fine or not. Now what I do, if I run now, it will run both of the scenario, but I don't want to run my first scenario, which was already working. I'll just run my second scenario. So I'll comment the first scenario, I'll run second one, and let's see if it works fine. Now we have the command npm test. Once we say npm test, it will look for the package.json. In that we have a script section that is here. In the script section, it runs this code, which will tell to run with WebdriverIO command, run this configuration file. This configuration file will look in a spec section and see what test is defined. As of now, I have defined only this feature file to run E2E users. If you say star here, it will run all the feature file, but I don't want to run all. Only this feature file we will need to run, and then in that only this particular. We can see how we can just use a tag and then target the particular tag itself rather than just commenting it out. That will be in the future video, but for now I have just commented this so that only this feature can run. Okay, so let's just try it out. Okay, so it's executing and look like it worked, right? Yeah, so look like it worked, and all the test step has been passed, and whatever we have printed as a API response, if you see, we got expect all actual response itself, name and the job, and all the assertion has passed, right? So now we can conclude whatever we have written now in this code with the API post call, it's working fine. In a post we need to say post, in get we need to say get here. In post we need, if you want to pass the payload, you can use send and then you pass your payload here. And if you want to add any parameter, that headers, you can use set and you can pass your en value pair like this, right? And then store that in a response variable, and then with that response you can access wherever you required outside of this function as well. Then a lot of extra space, I'll remove that. And now with this it is working fine. Now if you see here, I have defined name and the actual name and the value here and in this place as well. Now instead of doing that, what I'll do, I'll just cut it from here, okay, and I'll use this on top of it. I'll just mention, right? Now we need to pass this in multiple two places. One in UI, that is whenever you are doing this operation, right, entering data here, value and all, and plus in the API. So now with this, it will be helpful to reuse this. Okay, so what I will say here, in my I perform create search for API, wherever I have this function, now I don't want to just hard code my value here. We can say payload dot name and it will read from this place. Similarly, we can say payload dot job, right? And again, when you need to, this will be done in this place, right? API call. Now in post, in API call, this will directly load from here itself, right? So now we don't have multiple places. From one place we are passing in our API payload, and we are also passing in our UI also normally, right? So we can reuse this. Now a few more things are there, optimization this code. If you see here, I have passed that as a string, but we know that we have very limited number of this API operations available: post, put, create, post, put and get, delete. So these operations, we know that it's a fixed number, so we can optimize, we can control that. Instead of passing as a string, we can create an enum and then we can say that only these, out of these many options, pass either one, only these of these options, not any other random data. We can control those using creating enum, that we'll see in the next video. But for now, our post API call is working fine and we have got the proper response as well. So with that, we'll wind up this video, and if you have any questions or any clarification, maybe you can put out in a comment and I'll try to respond as soon as possible. Thank you so much.